The Stack. People, Business, Technology. With Dan Tomaszewski of Everything MSP.
Hello, everybody. Dan Tomaszewski here. Welcome to another episode of The Stack, where we focus on people, business, and technology. In today's episode, we're going to dive into the current AI boom. However, we're going to focus on something different than most are discussing, and it's going to be the back office of your MSP. We're going to explore why forward-thinking MSPs are starting to recognize the immense potential of artificial intelligence to revolutionize their internal operations and significantly boost profitability. So joining us to shed some light and on this important topic is we have Mr. Victor Lopez. We'll go ahead and bring Victor here. There's Victor. He is the founder and CEO of FlexPoint. It's a company that automates your billing operations to increase efficiency and cash flow. How you doing today, buddy?
I'm good. Yeah, no, it's it's a sunny day. It's getting hot in New York, so looking forward to summer.
Yeah, we've got a really hot weekend here in Michigan as well. Probably the same heat that you guys are seeing. We're going to be in the 90s, which is pretty wild here. So, but it is summer. We can't complain.
Yeah, exactly. It's finally summer. It's been raining here for what it seems like all spring. So we're looking forward to it.
Exactly. So, Victor, the buzz about AI is all on service delivery, enhancing technical efficiency. But today we want to zoom in a different area and focus on the back office. So, to kick things off, why do you believe that AI is going to impact all facets of an MSP's business and just not their tech support functions?
Yeah, no, I think it's an important question. And so I think, I think every business owner, whether an MSP or not, has been thinking about or should be thinking about, right, at least in the last year, if not, going back to when ChatGPT came out now, I guess 3 years ago, right? About how AI is, especially generative AI, is going to impact their business. And so I think naturally, right, in our market, the MSP market, where the focus has been and where most investment has gone is into service delivery, what we call sort of the client-facing side of things, right? So how can you improve your techs, make your techs more efficient when it comes like tickets, right, communication, triaging, and host of other really important things that we're starting to see really, really interesting tools. I think initially very much focus on that chat-like interface, right? Taking a lot of what OpenAI and some of the large language models have done to really be able to make that those tasks, a lot of those manual tasks, much more automated. And so we're talking about Beyond, but at Pax8 Beyond, there was a huge focus on agentic AI and agents, right? Really this next phase. And so I think a lot of the focus is still on, is there a possibility of this agentic type agents to really focus on that service delivery? Because ultimately, right, that's from the MSP standpoint, from MSP owner standpoint, that's really where a lot of the focus is, really driving that innovation. And so we definitely think that's critical. It's important. But when you look at sort of where the research is coming out, where the impact, so Bain Consulting, the very large consulting firm, right? So, and maybe before I get into that, just a quick side note, right? Like one of the things that I always like to talk about is when we think about who's actually benefiting from this huge generative AI boom, right? It's like people think about, OpenAI, all the other large language models, or the business software companies that are coming using a lot of this technology, or the businesses themselves that are using, right, generative AI. But the reality is, if you look at and there's been a ton of reporting on this, across Wall Street Journal, New York Times, a ton of really good articles on this. But when you take a zoom in and really take a look at who is really benefiting the most from generative AI, at least right now, it's the large consulting firms. So Bain Consulting, McKinsey, Accenture, etc. And most people are typically surprised to hear that, right? Like why them, right? And so what I think is fascinating, what I think is very analogous to the MSP market is you have in the enterprise, right? You have these large companies, these large enterprises who have read about generative AI, see the buzz, right? We hear about it every day. We're constantly bombarded with content around generative AI, but don't know what to do with it, right? You have executives at public companies, you have, members of boards of public companies, even large enterprises who are essentially, being fed all this content, all this information about how generative AI is going to be transformational, but don't know what to do about it, right? And so what you're seeing is, and what you typically see, right, and with when any sort of transformation, we've talked about digital transformation for what seems like 25 years now, but
Right. Yeah.
usually what's going on in the enterprise will then start to happen in our market, right? SMB, mid-market. And so what you're seeing is you have the Bains of the world, the McKinseys of the world, who are really benefiting from this boom because they're really the ones that are focused on helping these large enterprises figure out what to do with generative AI, right? How it can apply to the enterprise workflows, and the businesses that are sort of more often considered in the enterprise. And so one of the really interesting things that came out, I think this was towards the end of last year, was a research report that was put out by Bain Consulting. And they sort of dug into a lot of the information in terms of like who's going to benefit most from generative AI, what sort of areas, focus areas, workflows, etc. And what I thought was super, super interesting was that their number one conclusion was that knowledge-based roles were going to see the largest leap in productivity from generative AI. And so what does that mean, knowledge-based roles, right? So on a percentage basis, they had things like law firms. So 37%, right? They really think the impact on law firms, the legal industry as a whole, is going to be about 37%. Research, IT was very similar in that high 37%. But the biggest area where Bain in their report, in their research, believed that generative AI was going to have the largest impact from a productivity standpoint was actually in the back office, so the financial operations side of that. And so I think when we think about the impact of AI, generative AI in our market, in the MSP market, right? It's natural for us to look at it as, hey, shiny object, right? Super, super fun, interesting, figure out how to improve our service delivery. But we, and I believe that really where we're going to see the most impact, and what I mean by impact is really on the bottom line, right? Because ultimately, we're all looking to be very profitable businesses, where we believe the biggest impact on profitability is actually going to be on the back office. So, I think one of the areas that we're focused on, and what we think about from this standpoint, is what are the different tools and workflows and automations, and where generative AI can really impact those back office tasks, right? And so, I mean, let's be honest also, Dan, like, if I'm an MSP owner, right, I like to play with technology. I like to see the newest tools that are going to improve my ticketing, my service delivery. Do I really care about, right? Or am I very excited about, generative AI that's going to make it easier for me to invoice and get paid? Probably not, right? Like that's not really what gets me excited when I wake up in the morning, right? But it's still very important, very critical to that part, to the business itself and the growth in that standpoint.
Well, I think, you mentioned how, there's all this data out there. There's, you got executives that are, looking at these reports and seeing how AI is taking over the world. And then let's bring it down to the level of, the SMB market. And, you think about how MSPs can leverage the AI gold rush, if you will, and, help their clients with it. But I think what we need to do first is we need to be leveraging AI tools, in our own businesses first
Yeah.
to truly embrace it, to fully understand it, to have case studies and go through use cases with our clients to be able to say, this is what I did to, improve the efficiencies of our back office, how we've saved money. Because otherwise we're just talking about hypothetical things. And,
Absolutely.
and then they're going to be like, well, what have you done? And,
Right.
well, I'm here to help you, but what have you done? And if we
Right.
can't show them those examples, then they're going to be wondering, should I be wasting my time? So, and that was, at Beyond, one of the, big discussions was with many of the MSPs I had was, how are you going beyond just scratching the surface at, Chat GPT or Copilot,
Yeah.
to truly, immerse yourself in it and take it to the next level.
Yeah.
And so, I guess let's talk a little bit deeper on that front as far as
Yeah. No,
how we
absolutely.
can, yeah, how
Yeah.
can we streamline and improve those processes?
Yeah, I think you made a fantastic point. I mean, I love to use the term dog fooding, right? It's like
Yeah.
you kind of eat your
Yep.
own dog food, right? And so and that's exactly right. I think any sort of process workflow improvement, forget about AI for a second, but just any sort of improvement, right, to your business operations. I think if the MSP can implement that in their own business, right? Before they look to kind of be that trusted advisor to their clients on it, it's that much more impactful, right? I think we see that
Right.
in the security world. If I'm a client of an MSP, right? If I'm a typical SMB and I come to an MSP and it's like, okay, yeah, you have your house locked down, right? Like you have your
Yeah.
house, doors are locked, windows, whatever. You have the security in place. So I believe you. I trust you when it comes to security. And so I think a critical part of this, right, and not just in the back office and operations side of things, but just more broadly when it comes to generative AI, is if the MSP is not doing what they're trying to essentially advise their clients on, right? If they're not, kind of taking their own medicine, use whatever metaphor that you want,
Yeah.
improving their own processes. If I'm a smart client, right, like the first thing I'm going to ask is like, well, you're trying to sell me on this efficiency or this AI product or this, AI workflow, this agent, etc. How to use it, right? And now, of course, there's different verticals. The manufacturing clients are going to be very different, right? But I think broadly speaking, I think that's an important question for all MSPs to be asking themselves if they want to essentially be that advisor, that leader when it comes to helping their clients adopt AI, understand AI, really, be the Accenture that you see in the enterprise for the SMB, which is really the analogy that I think perfectly describes where we are and what we should be doing as an industry. I think the MSP has to be able to adopt these tools, use them, learn them to be able to then advise their clients. And so, just to maybe zoom back into the back office side of things, right? So, the reason why we think generative AI is going to really have the most impact on the back office profitability side of the business is because when you look at just a P&L, and I'm going to nerd out a little bit on just like financial statements for a second, right? So
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
any if this is above anyone's head, just come ask me, email me, explain more. But you have above and below the line when it comes to a financial statement, right? Above the line, you have revenue, right? Things you sell, services, managed services, etc. And then you have your cost of goods sold, right? So this is your COGS. And so your COGS, your cost of goods sold, these are things like service delivery, right? Like these are your techs, these
Hmm.
are the people that are actually doing the service, providing the services that you're charging for. And so when you take your revenue and your COGS and you subtract those, you get your gross margin. So you hear everyone talk about gross margin, right? It's like the higher gross margin, the better, right? Like obviously that's what you want to do. We can talk about how people don't categorize their COGS correctly on another conversation, but let's just
Right.
assume everyone's doing it correctly, right? And so that's your gross margin. Now, when you go below the line, right, now you have your gross margin and your overhead. So overhead, right, like that's your billing person, that's all the non-revenue generating people, your back office, right? The people that help you with billing, the people that help you with like payroll, non-revenue generating folks. That's your back office. And so when you think about profitability, right, net income, it's gross margin minus your overhead. So if you can really reduce and become super hyper efficient when it comes to your overhead, right? If you can have one person doing billing instead of three, right? That's going to have an immediate impact on your profitability, right? That's more cash
Yeah.
in your pocket. And so I use this example to really talk about generative AI in a very practical way, right? I think most people are talking about generative AI as this revolutionary thing, which it is, don't get me wrong. But I think in our industry, primarily SMBs, we need to think about it in terms of how it's going to impact my bottom line. How is it going to make me more money, more cash in my pocket? And
Yeah.
so one of the things that we're very much focused on, right, is identifying those areas in your back office, right, below the line, those overhead, where you can really gain efficiencies through generative AI and especially agentic AI, right? And the second part to that is really we're talking about areas again. I made the joke earlier, but like we're talking about areas that the MSP owner themselves doesn't want to be doing, right? It's like even if you go down to the very small MSP, right? Maybe it's the owner and one tech. So who's doing all the billing, all the back office tasks, payroll, etc.? It's usually the owner, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I guarantee you, I mean, we have hundreds of MSPs that are in a similar boat. They don't like doing that, right? I mean, Dan, you tell me, like when running your business, what's your favorite part of running your business? Is it the doing the invoicing every month and calling your customers and trying to collect, or is it the technology, working with your clients, like being that service provider, that trusted advisor?
Well, I mean, we're going from, let's look back to the conversation that we have often is, I know it sounds, like a overused term, but being on your business versus in your business. And, and you can't really grow and scale your business if you're being pulled back and pulled down by those type of activities. And, and the more we look at things, a lot of times you think, okay, what can I do to maybe outsource this or delegate that? And, now we could be looking at how can we leverage, AI automation and allow us to be more efficient at how we're doing things so that we can repurpose that time to things that are going to provide a much greater return on our investment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that you said that's critical is repurpose, right? The robots
Yes.
are coming. The robots
Yeah.
are not going to take our jobs, right? If we know what we're doing,
Right.
right? And so I think it's critical to talk about, especially agentic AI, in the context of repurposing, right? To your exact point, right? If I am the owner of an MSP and I spend 10 hours a week on billing, and I can have a billing agent that does or reduces that task to 1 hour a week for me. Now I have
Yeah.
9 hours to focus on sales and marketing, to focus on another part of the business, strategic part of the business, networking, right? Going to get more customers. So I'm glad you pointed it out, because I think a lot of folks are thinking about it in the context, well, yeah, I'm going to FlexPoint's going to sell me these back office agents that are going to completely eliminate my back office. I'm going to fire my bookkeeper, I'm going to fire my office
Yeah.
manager. That's just going to run by itself. And like the reality
Right.
is like
Right.
that's still a few years from away. But what we really want to do is have a better purpose for those humans, right? That human labor, and be able to leverage it to higher functioning tasks. And I think we think about this in the same way that folks talk about manufacturing, right? Going through the 60s into the 70s as manufacturing started to get offshored, the impact and what that happened, to critical infrastructure, critical things in industry, in the United States specifically. And it's like, well, did we do enough of a good job of, those folks that are used to doing, sort of these more manual tasks, to be able to do more higher level tasks, right?
Yeah.
More higher leverage tasks. And so I think that's the important distinction, making sure that we think about it as repurposing rather than replacing.
And I think too, as I've discussed with many MSPs about their headcount and their employee growth, many have said, I'm at a point where I do need to add another person. We have whatever number of employees we have at this point, but we need to add another person, but we've got enough work to keep them busy a quarter of the time or half the time, but not necessarily full time. And there's no way I can hire somebody to work those few hours. And so this is where we can look at that and say, okay, we don't need a full-time person to add. We don't necessarily need to bring on this full-time headcount, but if we can reduce some of the time that it takes to do the things that they would be doing, then we could maybe hold off on that, in from that perspective.
Yeah.
But I also think that from employee satisfaction perspective, if there are things that don't make them feel like they're being a robot, and they're being more part of the strategic process of actually having a bigger impact, it gives them a level of satisfaction, and it allows them to feel like they're providing more value and more worth to the organization than doing something that's trivial, that is being done over and over and over, and they feel like they're that robot.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And absolutely. And I think that's an important part of the conversation as well, right? Is having, having your people, your employees do things that, bring value to them, right? It's something that they want to be doing versus, hey, these manual tasks, right? Like, and you see this on the service delivery side. You see a lot of exciting tools when it comes to like, ticket summarization, right? Like how many, techs out there sit down and they dread like, writing up these tickets and we'll put in all the information. It's like, so if that part of it can be automated, right? I think that's just providing more leverage to the techs. And when it comes to the back office, right, I think it's even more impactful, because ultimately in a technology business like an MSP, the folks that are doing a lot of these manual tasks are not like, this isn't their zone of genius, right? We talk about the things that you're good at and the things that you like to do, right? And it's sort of that zone of genius. And I find in my experience, there's very, very few MSP owners who find their zone of genius to be in these back office tasks. So I think that the big summary, right, is automate the areas of your business with generative AI that you just don't like, right? That you don't like to spend time in, right? So that you can focus your time on things that you do like to spend time on. And then automate the parts of your business, right, using generative AI to increase profitability, right? And so think about it from a business perspective, not just like, what are the exciting tools? Because again, don't get me wrong, we didn't even talk about this, but just like the amount of hype in this space, right? Like the amount of hype in generative AI, promises of like, the moon, everything's going to change, blah, blah, which, don't get me wrong, I think there's massive, massive change that's coming. I think every market is going to adopt it differently, and there's going to be different impacts. But anyone that's selling, hey, like revolutionary change overnight is snake oil, right? And so I
Yeah.
think focusing on the business impact, how's it going to impact your profitability, but also just, some of the more adjacent areas, like to your point, Dan, is like client, employee satisfaction, right? It's like, is your employee, are your people happy? Are they satisfied? Do they find fulfillment in the tasks that they're doing, that they're focused on? Or is there areas for us to improve utilizing technology, generative AI?
What are your thoughts in the area too of around your culture, as far as I mean, we all want our employees to take the bull by the horn, to come up with new ideas, to find ways that we can be a better organization. But I think as we look at different methods, specifically around AI, how do we give them that pep talk to say, okay, first off, your job is secure, so they don't fear that they're going to be replaced by that robot, like we talked about.
Mhm.
But also, how do they get excited to say, I have permission to be able to look for ways in which we could eliminate this or that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a great question. I think these are things that we think about on our end just internally, but I think, everyone should be thinking about, right? Like how do you foster and encourage that curiosity, right? Like how do you encourage and provide avenues for your employees to think about how AI is going to impact their job. And I think you're right. I think from the outset, I think it's important to make clear that uh, nobody's losing their job, right? Nobody's losing their job today. And if anyone is actually worried about losing their job to an AI agent, right? I think it's critical to identify those people and talk to them about why they think that, right? Because to me, that
Yeah.
means that that person believes that what they're doing is a low value task, right? That they're
Right.
low on in terms of the value proposition when it comes to your organization. And if that's the case, I think that goes beyond AI, right? That goes beyond sort of technology. It goes into is this person, being fulfilled, and are they being challenged? And there's a host of things that we can talk about in terms of like employees and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I think that's number one, right? Making sure it's transparent as to what we talked about earlier. It's not replacing, it's repurposing, it's providing leverage. And so I think having that clear from the top, from leadership on day one is important. But I think along with that is giving people the opportunity to really explore this on their own, right? And so we do this all the time. Like we have across the board, right? Whether it's our engineering team, our support team, our sales or marketing teams, um, as we encourage them to kind of explore tools. And I think all of the AI tools out there for the most part have at least the most popular ones have this self-service model where you can kind of go tinker around, play with it. Like I play with Lovable, which is like one of these vibe coding tools all the time, and it's fun to use. And so I think um having that flexibility, but also having some structure to it, right? Like having, whether it's once a month or once a quarter, a sit down with, depending on the size of your business, right? Like with everyone, groups of them, to just brainstorm, have these conversations about like, hey, like what are areas that, the question I would ask is, what are areas of your job today that you just don't find excitement in, right? Like these are
Yeah.
things that you don't get excited about, and start there, right? Start with the areas where that you want to improve versus like, hey, I heard about this new shiny thing.
Right.
Let me see if I can fit that into our workflow somehow. I think starting from the first principles problem standpoint is really where I would start. It's like, hey, these are areas where I feel like I'm spending a lot of my time. If there's something that I can use to improve my time, free myself up, it's something that would be valuable to me. So that's kind of how I think about it. I think obviously it's a new area, right? I think a lot of people have, I'm sure, a ton of ideas on how to do it, but it's just how I think about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating stuff, and and it's something that uh, I think a lot of people can get excited about because it does have a positive impact on their daily. And as we work to wrap things up, I'm really interested to hear about how FlexPoint is approaching this. Can you give our listeners a glimpse into how FlexPoint, your product, is looking to incorporate AI into the back office?
Yeah.
To
So I won't.
essentially to
Yeah,
yeah.
I won't give away too much.
Okay.
We got some exciting stuff down the road. But again, I think from how we view this, right? We very much have been thinking about how AI, especially generative AI and AI agents specifically, can really have this impact, right? And so when we think about our vision, right? There's the back office, the financial operations of an MSP, and ultimately their customer. But to your point earlier, we focus on the MSP. We want to make them the experts before they go and try and advise their clients on this stuff. But as we think about our vision of really being the financial operating system for the MSP, one of the critical areas that we're focused on is bringing agentic AI to the MSP to relieve them of these workflows. Because ultimately, I think the future, right, and talked a little bit about this earlier, is I think in the future you might see a 5-person MSP that's doing 20 million of revenue because they're able to really leverage a tool like FlexPoint to automate the vast majority of their back office tasks, with agents doing invoicing, with agents doing billing, collecting payments, accounts payable, payroll, and then focusing on maybe having one person to really manage everything, right? Because you always need a human in the loop. And then having those 5 people really leverage service delivery, generative AI to have a higher leverage impact. So I think the future, and we're seeing this in the software world, right? You might be hearing of this where it's like the 2-person startup that's doing, $100 million of revenue because they're
Yeah.
leveraging generative AI. I think the same thing's going to happen in MSP. I think if we can build products, FlexPoint, others, right, that can provide that leverage to the MSP, you're going to see a future where headcount isn't really determinative of how much revenue an MSP can do. And so I think the future is really these lean MSPs who their whole back office is essentially automated through agents, and their focus on strategy, service delivery, and really getting that leverage. And then phase 2 of that, right, which is really, really exciting, is then becoming that trusted advisor for their clients, implementing these same tools and processes to the SMB to be able to provide leverage when it comes to their back office, their operations, and then ultimately the business itself. But a ton of really exciting stuff that's coming down the line. You'll see a lot from us later this year into the beginning of next year, but a lot of really exciting stuff in this area.
That's excellent. And Victor, it's been great chatting with you. For our audience that wants to learn more about FlexPoint and how you can leverage their levels of automation now with payment processing and so on, you guys can check out getflexpoint.com, and I've thrown it in the banner there. Of course, you are on the everythingmsp.com website. You can search for FlexPoint. It's a great method of getting directly to a member of their team. And with that being said, Victor, thank you so much. For our audience, until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Take care, everybody.
Thanks so much, Sam. All right.
Thank you for listening to The Stack.